Hello, everyone, and welcome to Celebrating Cinema. We're here for a very special interview with Catherine Hardwicke, director of Twilight, as well as films like 13. Why are we here with Catherine? Well, on the 20th of January, we're going to be doing a live recording and screening of Twilight, discussing our nostalgia of this film, its influence on us now, and what it's like to watch it grown up.
You're impossibly fast and strong. You gotta give me some answers.
I'd rather hear your theories.
I have considered radioactive spiders and kryptonite.
It's all superhero stuff, right? What if I'm not the hero? What if I'm the bad guy?
You know what you are? Your skin is pale white and ice cold. You don't go out into the sunlight.
Say it out loud. Say it.
Vampire.
Are you afraid?
No. This isn't real. This kind of stuff just doesn't exist.
It does in my world. I just want to try one thing.
But firstly, Catherine, welcome. How are you?
Hi, how are you guys doing? Excited to be here.
Yeah, what are you working on at the moment? Where are you at now?
Well, I'm in Vancouver. Yay. Okay. And it's very rainy like Amsterdam and cold. But I'm working on a Hulu project called Under the Bridge, which is based on a true, very tragic story, a book about some teenage girls that swarmed another teenage girl and beat her, and she ended up dying. And they covered up the story. They didn't tell anybody about it. And it's a tragic story.
Sounds pretty heavy, but it sounds like a couple of themes that have been a bit recurring in throughout your oeuvre, we could say. Of course, we are here to talk mostly, I guess, about Twilight, because that's the film that we'll be screening in Lab 111. And I think maybe a good leading question to start with is, what is kind of like the overarching interest that you maybe have in telling these stories that are quite complex and go very deep, but are also told often from a teenage perspective and take teenagers very seriously? We see it in 13, but we especially also see it in Twilight, that all those sentiments are very apparent and also very serious. So what was it like for you to kind of like constantly enter into the teenage mind and try to capture their worldview in your stories?
Well, I mean, one thing, it's such a tumultuous time, in everybody's life. And everybody remembers that, like, oh my God, how those most painful moments where you're rejected or you're accepted, or your first kiss of a guy or a girl, or the first time you got to drink or smoke or drive a car. There's so many first things you get to do, and so many. It's such a dramatic time. That's the most time, the most suicides, the most unwanted pregnancy. I mean, everything happens then. So I think our emotions are just, right on our sleeve. And that's pretty fascinating thing to capture.
What was it like for you, kind of like getting into the phenomenon of Twilight? Could you maybe, because we're almost 15 years post Twilight, could you maybe like set the table a little bit? You came out of 13, and there's this book. Like, what was your initial interest in the story? And did you always envision it to be kind of iconic success that it's now?
Well, it was pretty interesting because I did 13, I did Lords of Dogtown, another teenage movie from Guy's point of view. And I love those stories. And I was on the jury at Sundance in 2007. And these people from Summit said, we're forming a new company, and a company, they were usually a foreign sales company, but now they wanted to start making original content. And so they handed me like 5 different scripts and said, see if you like any of these. And if so, maybe we can make a movie with you, because they love 13. So I read all the scripts and I just threw them all away. I hated them all. One of them was Twilight script, okay? But it was not the Twilight that we know. Bella was a superhero track star. There were FBI agents. Bella was chasing them on jet skis by the end and everything. And so I'm like, whoa, it didn't really make much sense. It wasn't cohesive, no emotional, impact. So after that day, I threw all the scripts away. But the next day I thought, I wonder if that's based on a book or something, maybe there's something there. And so I went to the bookstore, I read the book. And then I called up the company and said, look, I've got an idea for this project, Twilight. Can I come in and tell you about it? So I put together a lot of images and everything. And I walked in. I said, first of all, this script has to go in the trash. It's no good. We've got to write the script similar to the book. The book makes you feel like you're falling in love for the first time. It's giddy. It's intoxicating. You feel like you just drank too much. I would try to make a film that captures the feeling of the book. Forget the jet skis and the FBI. Let's be with these two kids, And so the script was in turnaround. You guys know what that is? So when a studio pays a lot of money for the rights to something, then they decide not to make it.
Yeah.
And it's just like back to square one. Nobody wanted to make it. Paramount put it in turnaround. Every single studio said, this won't make any money. Okay. And they said to me, the biggest grossing teenage girl film before this was Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. And that only made like $29 million. And that was a much more popular book. But they liked my concept, and I said, I've never seen I love vampires. I've always seen them like in the back roads of, London, little dark streets in Paris. And I've never seen them in like nature, like in like pine trees in the Pacific Northwest. Because I'm in Vancouver right now, but I love the Pacific Northwest. I love huge, huge trees. I love moss. I love green things. And I thought this could be pretty cool, let's try it. And so they said, okay. And they threw out the old script. And then Melissa and I worked together to write a new one. I flew right away to Forks and, went all around Oregon and Washington and tried to see what the real place was like. And then we didn't know that it would be successful. That's what was cool about it. If they thought it was going to be a blockbuster, of course they would have never hired a woman director. No woman director's ever been hired at that time, to do a blockbuster. So of course it's like indie. Let's make it for no money, the least money we can and everything. And as we started making it and we started realizing more and more people online do love this book and they do care about it. And so Stephanie Meyer, the writer, she started doing more book tours. She was writing the third book. He started building the audience and then people started getting excited. But still, they told me, I said, I need more money, for this scene. I want to do this. And they go, we're not giving you any more money. And I said, but there's a big following online, I think people are going to go see it. That might just be 300 girls in Salt Lake City that are online. But, that's what they told me. So, we did not know it was going to be successful like that. But we started to realize, when we went to the Rome Film Festival, we did a little teaser there, like a 1-minute trailer at Rome. And we got like swarmed. Rob and Kristen and I went to a bookstore to sign books, and we couldn't leave. There were thousands of people.
Wow.
We didn't have any security, no bodyguards, nothing. We didn't know what was going to happen. And Kristen almost like got killed. I tried to jump in front of her. Rob tried to jump in front of her. People were crushing us. We couldn't get the car out of the little street.
Oh my God.
It was just wild. And we didn't know what was going to happen.
And this was even before the film was released.
It wasn't released yet. This was a few months before. Yeah. And people hadn't even seen anything. But, right when Rob got cast, people did not like Rob. There was a lot of negativity, but we said, we better put some nice photos of him where he looks like he's going to look in the movie. And then that started to turn the tide. And then people started getting more and more excited,
How was that casting process for you? Because of course these characters are forever in our minds, Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson. But of course there must have been a moment before that, I remember you saying in an interview that you saw Kristen Stewart in Into the Wild, I believe, for the first time, and
Yes.
that scene sort of started you all thinking that maybe she is our Bella now, we should say. But how was that casting process?
Well, I was excited to have no actors that people really knew. Nobody's super famous because I went to a book reading in Pasadena and Stephanie Myers read a couple passages from Twilight 2, I think. And as soon as she said the word Edward, people started, yelling and going,
Gushing.
and this is just a woman reading a name out loud. And I thought, oh my God, every person here, 1,000 girls have their image of Edward.
The power
And
that has.
yes, and it can't be somebody that we know already and we've seen him in 50 movies. Of course, 5 years before, Rob had been in Harry Potter, but that was, a while ago, a smaller part. And Kristen had been in Panic Room, but
Yeah.
just very small things. You didn't know, they're not household names. And when I saw Kristen, well, that was a very cool story for cinema, though, because when I made Lords of Dogtown, Sean Penn had done the narration for the documentary Dogtown and Z Boys. So he wanted to see Lords of Dogtown. So I went up to Northern California and showed Sean Penn and his son and all these skater kids Lords of Dogtown. And at the end, Sean goes, "Wow, who's that kid? Emil Hirsch. Get him on the phone." So I got Emil on the phone, said, "Here's Sean Penn." And Emil's like, "Holy shit." And then Sean hired him to be in Into the Wild, of course. Then they invited me to go see an early screening of Into the Wild. And I saw Kristen Stewart. I'm like, shit, I need her. So he took my acting, I took his acting, which was pretty cool. But I thought she had that longing when she's sitting there in the trailer, and just looking at Emil, and she just wants to be with him. I thought, oh my God, that could be our girl. And then I flew to Pittsburgh, where Kristen was making a movie at Adventureland, I think. And I took another actor with me, and I said, I want to just audition with her and play with her for the day and just be sure this is the perfect thing, that we can work together, because I like to improvise and stuff. So we ran around, we chased pigeons in the park, we danced, we did a million crazy things, we did scenes. And I'm like, okay, I love Kristen. Yay. And now we need Edward. And every guy that I saw looked like this very cool, handsome dude, but he looked like he could just be the guy next door.
Too conventional.
He could just look like the guy in my high school or something. And I didn't believe that he'd been alive for like 100 years and had all this deep, angst and all this ethereal qualities, that we needed. And so I was just looking, who is going to be this guy? The fans are going to kill me if I don't get it right. And, and then when I saw some photos and some of Harry Potter, I talked to Rob on the phone in London. I said, do an audition for me. And he didn't like his audition. I said, well, we can't afford for you to fly out here. So he decided to do that on his own dime. He spent his own money to fly to LA. He slept on his agent's couch. And then he came over in like a dirty T-shirt, and his hair was all dyed black. And he did the auditions for about a couple hours with Kristen and I. And at the end, Kristen was like, oh my God, it has to be him. And I said, hey, Rob, she's under 18. It's illegal in this country for you guys to have sex. And they're like, what? And I said, I can see the chemistry, but we've got to be like straight ahead, legal. It was pretty.
That's funny that you say that, because it's like so special seeing, especially nowadays, many mainstream films you don't really see that on-screen chemistry anymore like you sometimes used to do. And I think a thing that made Twilight so immediately relatable and gratifying for people is that you actually see how much fun they have acting and being on screen together. So I'm wondering, like, what was it like putting them through those very intense, sentimental scenes? But it works because of them, also because of you and everybody else, but they make it work. So what was it like to actually start on the story together on set?
Well, let me go backward for 1 second. I like that. Part of it in the audition process, you've got to be sure you have it in the audition process, or you're not going to probably get it later on. So even the most intimate scene, they did it on my bed, the kissing scene on my bed at my house in Venice Beach. And I'm filming them to be sure that they're going to be able to have that playfulness. We did it a few times. One time, Rob fell off the bed. He got so excited, I'm like, whoa, okay. But, you want to be sure that these two, before you get to the movie, that they're really going to be able to play and that they care about each other and they feel for each. So we actually had Kristen, I had her audition with 5 guys, not just Rob, and I filmed each one of them. So once we start the process, now we go to your question, we filmed it in Portland, Oregon, okay, the first one. And we got there early because I wanted to rehearse. I wanted people to bond. I wanted the Cullens to bond. And, when I did Lords of Dogtown, we had a skateboarding and surfing boot camp. Okay. And when I did 13, we all lived in the house, and like ate the food and everything. But I thought, how can we have a vampire boot camp? I mean, are we going to go out and suck blood together or whatever? So the best we could kind of do was the baseball, learning how to play baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very good bonding, like playful experience, learning how to hit a ball, catch a ball, all that. That was fun. The Rob and Chris and I rehearsed together, just the 3 of us, the more intimate scenes. We created like a whole emotional arc, because it was very important. Like the first moment that they ever even brushed their hands together, that electricity. We never went too far. I had a chart all the way. This is the first time they brush. This is the closest they sit together. Here's the closest, it was all kind of planned out to really be agonizing for them and for us.
I'm surprised, or it's very nice to see how animated you are when you speak about this, as if you remember it from yesterday. And I'm sure these are sort of stories you tell over and over again, but it seems like your relationship with this film hasn't changed, even though it has become such a phenomenon. And I wondered, how do you sort of reflect back now, 15 years later, on your time making that film?
Well, that's a great question. I think it actually relates to 13 and Lords of Dogtown and Twilight, because myself and the actors put so much love and intensity and care and so much aliveness in every scene that even if you watch any of those again, it's still the same amount of alive. It's still alive. Like I watched 13 again. I watched Lord of Dogtown. I watched Twilight. And I feel the actors were so present, they were so there that you still feel it, So I think that's, in a way, the secret. If you put that amount of love the first time, that moment, it can stay alive.
Even watching it now, it was also refreshing how well you do capture these moments, like you say, are the first kiss or the first time we fall in love, and even when we're older, we still relate to that same feeling. And I wondered, sort of again, where you speak about making it from a place of love, where this idea of wanting to make film came from. Sort of, you started making films, I think around 28. You went to UCLA, if I'm correct, and sort of your relationship to film, because your approach is again something probably perhaps different to what people are used to in the industry, or making the kind of films that you have made.
Oh, yeah. I want to answer that, but I want to say one thing. I had an 85-year-old lady came up to me when we did Twilight and said, "This was my story." 85-year-old woman, and she remembered exactly when she was, that age, wore the tights and this, any age. I think Romeo and Juliet was not just made for a 15-year-old, written for 15-year-old. Like any age you remember when you felt that passionate, Hopefully we always stay passionate our whole life. But okay, the other question was, okay, so when I went to architecture school, I was 17. I was an architect before filmmaking. And the same thing, I freaking loved architecture, everything about it. Oh my God, he gets color, line, texture, form, creating exciting spaces for people. I loved it like 1,000,000%. But at that time, now we have a lot more creative buildings. I mean, the I Museum in Amsterdam, very creative and freaking cool, but not so many people, even now, the percentage of interesting buildings compared to boring buildings. I mean, look at all the boring buildings out there. There's maybe one or two they got to add a little light on it or something. So I realized like that kind of creativity and passion wasn't exactly encouraged in architecture. And so I thought, what would encourage it? Storytelling, filmmaking, and that was what led me to think maybe the film business encourages creativity. Now I was wrong. I didn't know about sequels, IP, all that shit. I just thought, oh, they want you to be creative, So I went to animation school at UCLA, but the animation at that time was just a factory. You had to be part of a big old giant 3,000 people, whatever. And so I started making my own, making my own little short films, but then also production designing sets for other people's films, which I loved. But as soon as you put all that love and care into the set, and then the actors are just boring or the story's boring, I'm like, oh my God, this isn't working either. I'm going to help tell the story too, So I started writing my own scripts and making my little short films and everything.
Well, as a production designer, you collaborated with some, fantastic directors, and you've worked on some incredible films as well. And I'm wondering, when you kind of like transitioned from production design to directing your own feature films, what were some of the maybe key lessons or like biggest parts of advice that you took away from your experience on all those different sets when you had to apply them to your own sets?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, Richard Linklater is one person that I loved working with. I did 2 movies with him. And of course, he has many beautiful techniques to work with actors, to get collaboration, to rehearse and bring scenes to life, rehearse with his DP. So I was just like, all eyes like, whoa, what did he do there? What did he do there? That was cool. And I'm still friendly with Rick and go out there and teach at his Austin Film Society and stuff. And, I would always ask him, I see those 2 actors were starting to fight, but you didn't even get upset. How did you stay cool? And he would tell me his technique, or if he wanted an actor to do something. So he would give a lot of advice. Cameron Crowe, I did Vanilla Sky,
I mean, I love Vanilla Sky also from an architectural production design standpoint. It's genius.
That was very cool, very lucky, wonderful job I got. But Cameron, works a lot with music, and so he has the music that when he wants to change the mood, between 2 actors, he'll change the music and then get people into the musically, instead of verbally so much. That was very cool. David O. Russell, I did 3 Kings with David, and David had like so much energy, like every minute, and he's just so creative, and we're gonna do this and this, and so he and I were like, yeah, that was like a wild combination, very fun. How he brought life to every moment, every moment. It was never just like, you could never take a nap on the set. You don't know where the camera is going to be, what new idea he's going to get. He was very prepared, but he would bring new ideas. So kind of taking all of those 3, I guess, and other people I work with, sort of putting them together. Yeah.
The directors that you name are all men. And 6 years ago, the Toronto Film Festival introduced you as like the great chronicler of the female experience. Was it difficult for you as a female filmmaker to move into filmmaking and to sort of make your own place within that community and making your becoming the chronicler of the female experience, if you want to call it that.
Well, that's a good point. And I did work with two female directors, Lisa Cholodenko, who's amazing. And I should have talked about her, and Rachel Talalay, who did Tank Girl.
Oh, fun. I love Tank Girl.
Yeah. And she's very creative, let me be extremely creative. Lisa, very creative. So I learned from them too. I should have put them into that pantheon. But it's true, out of whatever 25 movies, only two women, so you don't see that as an example too much. But I guess I just thought, like, I'm from South Texas. My dad is a farmer, and I could never have imagined doing any of the things that I did. So why not just believe that you can do anything? I didn't really think negatively that I had a big battle. I just thought, I can do that. I can do that, and of course, the stories that I'm drawn to mostly would be something that I could relate to. When I did 13, of course, I knew Nikki Reed very well already, and I could just feel what she was going through. So I could feel that, So I guess women's stories are normal to me,
Sure. Do you think that did you see like a change within your career when you made Twilight? Also, maybe from I don't want to hammer down on this, you being a female filmmaker, but I could imagine that if you make something that is such a cultural phenomenon that it changes your career trajectory, and that it offers you chances, or it maybe even brings you a bit of bad luck. I don't know.
Well, we've definitely talked about this a bit. I was disappointed, should we say, that I directed the first one, but there were 4 more Twilights, all directed by men. There were 2 Divergents, and there were 5 Hunger Games. None of those would have happened if Twilight wasn't successful. Some of them
Right.
was the same studio, but why didn't they hire another woman director for any of them? That's really not cool, people.
No.
And so it's taken a lot of podcasts, a lot of articles, a lot of talk to try to change that pattern, so that we have, of course, Patty Jenkins and Chloe Zhao and Catherine Bigelow, and other people that have broken out and got to do big budget movies. But even so, we just got the new study this year. It's back to 8% women. It's gone down, the percentage this year of female directed movies. So it's still a challenge. You still have little dumb things like women don't know how to do action, or they don't know how to do visual effects, or, can they handle a giant production like that? You still have dumb little unspoken prejudice like that.
I think what's also kind of really crazy is that studio execs, but maybe also a lot of other powerful people in the creative industry, keep underestimating the women, and especially teenage girls, as an audience that actually wants to go to the movies, right? Because you said that you referenced that they mentioned like, oh, maybe there's like 300 girls blogging away in Salt Lake City, but there's like, throughout history also of the 20th century, there's been so many cases where people underestimated the passion and enthusiasm and devotion of women, and young women especially, as like a big consumers of art and culture and stories. It's crazy that that even lasts deep into the 21st century as well. And I think one of the good things that Twilight has also done is maybe activate that a bit more. And it's sad that it has like no practical consequences behind the scenes, but maybe for the audience, it was a liberatory moment.
You're absolutely right. And people will always make an excuse. Oh, why was that successful? Not because of the director or the casting or anything, but it was a successful book. They'll
Oh yeah.
try to make an excuse, like, or if you say I've got another project, like, oh, it'll never work. That one worked only for this reason. So
Hmm.
there are ways to make excuses for anything. But you're right. During production, I put a picture of Titanic up on the wall because I
Yes.
said, think about how many times women went back and saw that movie again and again. So let me have a moment. Like I put that treetops moment, which was very thrilling, like kind of like being on the front of the boat. I'd have a picture of Titanic and how much it made, and then say, can I have some money to do this? So like, how can you sell people on your idea?
Well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because James Cameron also had to like convince people that he could make Avatar because it was a new IP, and he had to constantly remind the studio to say, I made Titanic, so give me the money. It's insane that some directors who have proven to be successful still have to fight, I guess, for a tiny bit of momentum or autonomy.
Yeah, it is wild. But I mean, people are just so worried, and, the budgets are so high and the risk and everything. But, I am excited that we were able to sneak a lot of cool sort of messages into Twilight. Let me say this, like, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a big environmentalist person. So, we made Bella a vegetarian. You see the whole crew going to talk about recycling and worms, and and then also since I'm an architect, I was able to have that Cullen House, beautiful modern architecture,
Beautiful. Fantastic.
instead of just tacky, architecture. Even when I went back to the Cullen House maybe 2 years ago, there were architects from Guam visiting out on the street taking pictures of the house. I'm like, that's pretty
That's so cool.
And there are still no beds in there, or are there? Nobody sleeps.
That would be cool if they didn't. It's actually a Nike executive's house. Very beautiful. Yeah.
Lucky him. I wanted to talk a little bit about some stylistic traits and how they developed throughout I guess also from your early movies that have a bit more of a verite kind of feel, especially 13, take so many cues from a kind of like really cinema verite, documentary, direct kind of like feel. And what it was like, maybe if you could compare working on a film like that and then have that kind of like sweeping, seemingly big budget feel of Twilight that has a much more, let's say, conventional blockbuster feel to it. What was it like to kind of capture those teenage moods in those different formats?
Well, I was interested in trying to film each project what made sense for the project and the feeling for the project, right? So in 13, I spent a lot of time with Nikki and her friends, and their energy was fucking crazy off the charts. In 1 minute, it would be like, we're pissed. We hate those guys. They're assholes. Then a cool song would come on. Oh, we're dancing, Then the next minute, somebody says you look fat and you're in tears, And that's all in like 30 seconds, Anger, joy, happiness, sorrow. And I thought that is not a static camera in a way. Because
No.
they did not sit still. They were moving all around. They were running into the room, slamming the door, coming out. So I thought, I got to be like Scorsese on Mean Streets or whatever. I wanted to be like war photography, not teenage movie photography, war photography. How do you follow these explosive things and go move, 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 move? So that was perfect for that. Then Lords of Dogtown, same thing, very high energy, but they had wheels. Oh shit.
Yeah.
Handheld, somebody on wheels. So you got to use motorcycles and everything to keep up with them. Okay, Twilight had a more, I should say, contemplative feeling, more internal feeling. And we're out in nature in these beautiful landscapes that, with the forest and everything, that you've got to, you can't just be tight. Like, you've got to feel it, it's got to breathe. So trying to find the language that fits the film. But in Twilight, I think you might see it's the same cinematographer as both of those other two.
Yes,
and you see the little minimal corrections, little snap zooms and things that still make it extremely personal in Twilight, that when you're feeling something, you see that little intimate connection. So some of that language is still there in Twilight, even though we do open up.
I think you also see that it's the same cinematographer when with the baseball scene, where because it has at the beginning of 13, you have that moment where our protagonist gets checked out if she's popular enough, and you have all these kind of like very fast, subjective kind of like fast cutting zooms, and it has a really similar kind of like momentum and feel to it as the baseball scene in Twilight. So that it's funny that you mentioned the consistency that's also throughout the films.
And the same editor. That's
Yes.
even more about the editing in both of those too, Nancy Richardson.
Yep. Well, I have a very specific question about the look and the feel of those films, because Twilight, looking back on it, 2008, it's such a critical juncture in mainstream film, in what mainstream film was supposed to be like, because it's the year that Iron Man also got released, and that set the tone for a lot of like big budget movies. There's something so interesting, but also, if I dare say, quaint about the color schemes of Twilight. They have that kind of like constant kind of like bluish hue over it, and that's also very present in a very specific moment in 13, when our protagonist is like has almost hit rock bottom and is at her lowest point. And I was wondering how you approach color as this like very present stylistic method or like tool to tell your stories as well.
Well, for example, in 13, we had the idea that in the beginning of her life, everything looked kind of ordinary before she met the bad girl. And then when the bad girl, Evie, came into her life, it got a little more golden glow, kind of like a commercial. It looked more fabulous. And then as she started hanging out, doing more drugs, getting crazier, we kept cranking up the chroma so that it got a little more garish and a little bit more intense and bad, And then when Evie broke up with her, we drained the color. So we desaturated to what you're calling the blue or whatever, the desaturation, lack of color. Now the joy or the badness, fun, bad part of her life went away. It was almost desaturated. So in Twilight, we had a situation where if the sun came out, the vampires have to sparkle. Okay.
Yeah.
So sparkling costs money. We don't have hardly any budget to pay for sparkling. Plus, sparkling can be kind of hokey. You know what I mean? So I wanted to have the least amount of sparkling dudes as I could. Okay. And so for one thing, you have to go. The reason Stephanie Meyer said it in Forks, Washington, she Googled the cloudiest place in the U.S. and she said it's Forks. So, but even the cloudiest place in the world, like you guys are in Amsterdam, we're in Vancouver, it's still, the sun comes out some days, and you cannot predict it, even if it's supposed to be the cloudiest place. But if you saw like bright sun in the movie, then it takes away the illusion that the vampires have to be under the clouds. So we basically really wanted to control the look of the film, even though you can't control the weather. So we had to have a call sheet with 3 different scenes. If it was raining, we were going to shoot this. If it was bright sun, we had to shoot this. If it was cloudy, we shoot this. Every day we were ready for 3 different scenarios. And so we had to try to create the most consistent look possible, which I think that's how you're talking, how it turns into the cloudy Pacific North.
It's like, it looks like day for night shooting as well, but it has like this ethereal, it is a more ethereal approach to it as well. I think it fits the story and the characters very well. It's just that not a lot of films from that time or the time after look the way that Twilight looks. So it also kind of sets it apart in an interesting way.
And in fact, you might know this, but during the pandemic, a lot of people watched Twilight again, and a whole new generation saw Twilight. And they made a filter called you can buy this online, the Twilight filter, and you order it and you can put it in front of your face so you can be in Twilight every day.
We need to have that for our live screening. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, when was the last time you watched Twilight? Because it sounds like you do revisit your films.
Uh, I teach a lot of classes, so at Sundance or at USC or whatever, Cal Arts. So I take little clips from all the different films that have some fun little lesson or fun little story. And so I've seen little clips of Twilight, in my last class I taught a month ago, on Zoom or whatever. But I don't know when I've seen the whole movie though. No, not in a long time.
I think a question I think we're interested to explore is that when Twilight came out, it was obviously this teen phenomenon, but now as we look back, it's growing into more of a cult-like film. And I wonder what you thought about that, this idea of how Twilight, although very much rooted in the time that it was made, is still evolving or taking on new meanings, perhaps, as a film itself.
Well, even when Twilight came out, the most common thing that anyone ever came up and said to me was, and I heard this like 9,000 times, I know I'm not the demographic, but I really liked it. I was like, could you say anything more? Okay, I know you're a guy, or I know you're a, 30-year-old person, but like I said, I mean, did Shakespeare write Romeo and Juliet? The lead characters are 15 years old. Did he think only 15-year-olds are going to like it? No. So why do people have to say that? I know I'm not the demographic, but even so, every age, every person, Twilight moms, Twilight, blah, 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 everybody, at the very beginning, it was already a cultural, outrageous phenomena. I thought, people would sleep outside in long lines for it. They were just so devoted to it. They would dress like the characters from the first time. I went to the theater the night before it opened. I thought, I wonder if anybody's like already waiting in line. Well, I went with my friend and I had a little video camera. I'm going to film it. And we're driving along and there's 2 blocks of people in
Oh my
Los
God.
Angeles, Westwood.
That's the definition of a blockbuster right there.
I know, and they're sleeping in tents. And I had the camera in front of my face like this. They still recognized me and
Wow.
started yelling. And I'm not even an actor in it. They're yelling. So I had to get out of the car and I stayed for 3 hours and signed everybody's pillowcase, their books, their blankets, their tents. So it was already a crazy cult. And then I've been to some absolutely crazy events for Twilight where people literally came up to me and said, this was on camera scene. And how do you like this sweater? I'd be like, looks great. And it was in Twilight 4, one of the friends wore that sweater and they had bought it, on eBay, the exact sweater. I'm like, this is, it was just, this is the Cullen's cafeteria Bella, outfit. People were just wild. But what I realized is there were a lot of people that felt extremely alone in New Zealand, extremely alone in a little town in northern England. When they came to these conventions, they found a friend. Online they found friends. People that could not read before Twilight came out, they learned to read. For Twilight, they found community. And we laugh at people. I laugh at people that go to football games and paint their faces blue and green and all that stuff. But that's a community. That's how people bond and they get to express themselves. So it's great for people to express themselves and fall in love with Twilight and find a community. That's awesome.
On a personal level, how does that feel? Like, I mean, to be there with your video camera and witness the first cue for the night of the release, and then all these other stories and the community that you've built. I'm sure it's not something you could ever have imagined, but how does it feel back then and now thinking about it?
Well, it was pretty crazy. Like I thought it was crazy because I never was that person. I never went and waited in line or painted my face green or whatever. But I thought it was pretty neat because I could see that these people really had fun doing it. They really made a community and they were just so excited and it really meant a lot to them, in their lives, and they saved up money to go. So, you have to kind of be happy if you can make somebody else happy. That's a positive thing. Why not? You don't get that chance very often. And yes, I went to Austin like the first night of Twilight, and a big person just came up and just hugged me and almost killed me. She was so excited about it and just, fainted on top of me and crushed me. I'm like, ouch, but that's cool. In a way, that's cool. That person was so excited. I'm happy she had that moment in her life, like to be happy about something.
Yeah. I mean, and now that we're talking sort of community and audience, I think this is a great chance to bring in some audience questions. I'm going to start with one that we had, which I really like. It's given the trajectories of both Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, what film would you make with them now as sort of leading roles?
Oh, wow. I mean, they're so. First of all, let me just say, Rob and Kristen have done amazing things with what happened to them.
Yeah.
They were more
Yeah.
like indie kids. They did not think all this crazy shit was going to happen. They thought they were making an indie movie, but what they've done with their fame or power, were able to greenlight tons of indie movies. I mean,
Yeah.
they actually helped a whole indie film, community. So that is freaking great. I really admire them and love them. And, I hope I have the perfect project someday that would be, worthy of them, like hopefully find the right project for them someday.
Are you still very much in touch with them?
Well, they and myself and everybody is very busy. But, like, for example, Kristen, I got some award or whatever, and she came and presented it to me. And, I see Rob at an event for an Oscar thing, we laugh about stuff. So, of course, when I run into them, I love them. They're like amazing to me, you know.
Tom, do you have some more questions for us?
Well, yes, it actually ties into you all being very busy. You said that you were very busy with making a Hulu series, and one of the questions that one of our listeners sent us was actually a rather interesting one, because do you think that if Twilight would be made today, it would be made as a, let's say, a Netflix series, maybe more than a movie?
Maybe so. I mean, like, obviously Stranger Things and Wednesday are amazing and they have the fantastic production value. So maybe would have got more money too. And maybe I could have done some of the things that I wanted to do. I didn't get to do everything I wanted to do. But yeah, I guess we all are just trying to figure out, is it still fun to go to a theater? I think it was a lot of fun to go see Twilight with a theater full of people, because people were yelling and screaming and really reacting. And you don't quite get that at home, not as much. But I mean, you can have a party at home, but you don't get 300 people kind of like yelling and enjoying it at home. So it's pretty fun to go to the theater. You got to admit, it's fun. And I just did a movie right before this one that we shot in Rome, which is a comedy. And I've seen it with, 300 people. And every one person starts laughing, the next one laughs, and then you really get a feeling like everybody's laughing and screaming together. That one's called Mafia Mama. And it's more fun to see it with other people. Some movies are a lot more fun.
Well, I'm happy to say that Mafia Mama will be out here in April, so we can see it.
Yeah.
Our listeners can go and watch it.
People
here
should
at the cinema.
see it in the cinema. Yes. I have just a quick interjection, because you said that there's a couple of things in in Twilight that you wish you could have done but couldn't because of budget constraints. Can you share us one of the biggest darlings that you had to kill in the process? A thing that's still on your mind, that you would have loved to revisit if you would have the chance now with a bigger budget?
Yeah, I mean, I did have a beautiful underwater sequence that I wanted to have in, and of course, I think they put it in the second one, but I didn't get to do it. But there were a lot of beautiful things with the Pacific Northwest where you see the logs, there's all the logs in the rivers. And so I had some very kind of neat things with the logs and rivers. There's a beautiful city called Astoria, where you have piers that are half finished. So I had these like gorgeous things. I really wanted to film in the real city, the real town of Forks, because it has a lot of quirky stuff there. We didn't get to that. And then the ballet sequence, I had a lot more radical action there, but they made me
Ah.
so we would have had even more wild scenes in that final action scene at the ballet studio.
Well, I mean, we are recording this now to sort of preface the screening that we will be doing in on the 20th, which will be sold out, and which will probably spark more screenings of Twilight. Because just to tell a minor story, is when I started out as the programmer of the cinema that we are recording this podcast for. I always said to my colleagues that there was going to be a moment when we were going to screen Twilight, and some of my colleagues actually said that would be bizarre. But I was always very adamant about the fact that it was a cultural phenomenon that was going to, the perception of the film was going to change for some people, because the female friends that I had who had seen it when they were young and when they were like 16 years old, and they saw it, and they saw the longing that they had in high school for these very specific guys, that I must say, they grew up, and their nostalgia for the film sort of also changed with them. They had a very special relationship with that film. I think that's one of the reasons why our we have a rather young audience is now coming back to the film. I would just want to ask you, what would your message be to them? I mean, maybe we can then sort of play that when we do the podcast recording and we screen the film.
Oh, okay, my message. I guess what I was trying to do with the film is really make you feel as intoxicated as when you watch the film as you felt when you fell in love with somebody for the first time. It's just to help you just go into a state of almost euphoria, longing and euphoria. And so that's what we were trying to do with the film, and I think the actors did a pretty damn good job of it too. So
I think so too. Well, if I can add another question, if we're talking about love for the first time, with this podcast, we often kind of like go back to our formative experiences of like experiencing film as well, because that's usually where a lot of your initial kind of like tastes and interests and passions for cinema and for life already start developing. And could you maybe bring us back to like your early days and some maybe a formative movie experience that made you fall in love with the art form and the media? Do you have one of those like fond memories of movie watching or moving going that you always carry with you?
I mean, I think one of the first movies I saw, I'm from a very tiny little town, and we had only one theater, and mostly they had Spanish language films and some Clint Eastwood films. Okay.
Yes. You're in good home here. If you're this is a
But
pro Clint Eastwood home.
but I remember when I was a little kid, the first thing I remember is seeing one of those like Snow White and the Snow Queen, and just being so like animated and being so terrified that I had to run out of the theater. So I love that thrill, of just being scared out of your mind, that was cool.
That's amazing.
And the power of just a dark room to create that, strong feelings, strong emotion.
Well, that maybe brings us to one of our final questions that ties into your recent visit to Amsterdam, because you were part in the Film Museum in this program called Missing Pictures, where directors kind of revisit works that they weren't able to make, but they're still kind of like, that they still hold close to them, films that they would have loved to make. And in your case, it would have been an adaptation of the Monkey Ranch Gang, a book. And the whole point of the Missing Pictures program is that this now gets kind of revisited or approached in VR. And we wanted to ask you what that experience was for you to work in with this program and to kind of like think through VR about the film that you wanted to make as well. Can you talk us a little bit about what that was like for you?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I love the concept of the series of Missing Pictures, because every director, I mean, right after I did Twilight, I thought, wow, I'm going to be able to make whatever I want. I'm a successful person. That's absolutely not the case. And it's really not the case for anybody. Like you mentioned, after Titanic, James Cameron still has to go and pitch. So we have these projects that, as a director, you see it in your head. It's going to be the best movie ever. And people are going to go crazy and love it. And you don't get to, and the green light doesn't happen, it's heartbreaking. And so I love the idea that Christian thought, let me give these 8 directors or 6 directors a chance to bring it to life in a small way. Great idea. And in the VR situation, I did not realize that I was going to have to be a character in it, So I was a bit shocked when I showed up on the set, and I had to pretend like I'm sitting on the rock and all this. But that was fun, very fun, because I force other people to do those things, so I should be forced to do it. And but anyway, it was really a fun experience to see what his imagination did, how he brought the whole story to life and created the environment, which is a very specific the southwestern U.S. southwestern desert environment. How do you create that in VR? I'm not sure that it's the perfect technique to use to make that movie, because that movie needs to be very real. If you get to make it, it's really much a strong sense of place, and it's about saving the environment. It's about saving that southwestern desert and not ruining it. So I think it's better in the real place. But I love the idea, and I love the idea of VR, in world building, creating whole new, awesome worlds and spaces that we can't go and shoot in the real place because they don't exist. They're in the future. Cool stuff. In Amsterdam, you have Submarine, that awesome animation studio that works with Richard Linklater. We have a lot of really creative people there that do, awesome world building things. So exciting. I hope I'm going to work on a project with them too.
Oh, that would be really cool.
Well, that would be great, because Submarine is located inside our cinema building. So that's
what? Are you
that's
serious?
a great coincidence. Yeah.
Oh my God, they just sent me a really cool script. I was reading it yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, they're lovely people. I mean,
make a movie with them, and then you can come over and we can watch some good films in Tom's cinema.
There you go.
It would be a pleasure.
That would be fun. Well, Tommy, you guys know Tommy then. So he was Pelota, the anime. So he was there he came and met me at the museum. Yeah.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think this is a great place to end it. We want to say a special thanks to the Eye and Anna Abrams for making this possible, but also, of course, to you, Catherine. I think our audience are really going to appreciate hearing from you before they get to watch Twilight again.
On the big screen.
Yeah, on the 20th. We'll also be doing a live recording as well, which we will send to you, so you can hopefully hear what some of our audience think again watching it. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I just thought of one thing right when you said that. Even from the very beginning, Twilight would just, make people use their imaginations to write fan fiction and to do parodies and everything. And I thought that was hilarious. There was Twilight with hamburgers, Twilight with rabbits. There were so many variations that got other people to be very creative, So that's pretty cool. Of course, it inspired 50 Shades of Grey it's inspired so many wacky things.
Yeah, we plan to read out some of the fan fiction at Twilight.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, thank you guys. You guys are awesome. I hope you guys got all the girls in high school that you wanted, because you're all delightful.
Thank you. We did our best. That's all we can say.
Let me ask one question. Did you tell the truth? Did you go get the Edward haircut?
I almost always already had it. I'm kind of close to it.
I did.
Okay, good.
Being a British then at the time, it really helped. Yeah, so
Okay.
thank you.
Well, thank you guys.
Yeah,
Catherine, it
we hope
was a
to see you
pleasure.
again
Thank you
next
so
time.
much.
Yeah.
Wish
Okay.
you a beautiful Sunday.
Yeah, you
Bye-bye.
too.
Thank you so much. Such an honor. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.